Welcome. I'll be your interpreter, Nicholas, with Samantha. I want to thank the organizer of this event for their commitment to language justice. Language justice means that all people have the right to speak and be heard in the language of their hearts. Therefore, this meeting will be interpreted in English and Spanish simultaneously. Once I finish speaking, we will turn on the interpretation function. At that time, please choose your preferred language on the toolbar on the bottom of your screen by pressing the interpretation icon and clicking Mute Original Audio. Thanks. Bienvenidos. Seré su intérprete Nicolás con Samantha. Quiero agradecer a los organizadores de este evento por su compromiso con la justicia del lenguaje. La justicia del lenguaje significa que todas las personas tienen derecho a hablar y ser escuchadas en el idioma de su corazón. Entonces, esta reunión será interpretada en inglés y en español simultáneamente. Una vez que termine de hablar, se activará la función de interpretación. En este momento, elige su idioma preferido en la barra de herramientas en la parte inferior de su pantalla en Zoom, presionando el icono de interpretación y haga clic en Mute Original Audio. Muchas gracias.
Hi, good evening. My name is Cynthia Braddock. I'm the Boulder County Assessor, and I'd like to start out by thanking both Natalie Springett and Jennifer Churchill, who are hosting and managing this call for us, and also for the county commissioners for making this available and allowing us to have this event. So great deal of appreciation to all of them. I also want to take a minute and introduce some of my staff that are on this call. Brian Floyd, who's a commercial supervisor in my office, will be helping me answer questions. And then I have Kathy Brennan, who's our agricultural appraiser, and Ken Beezer, who's my appraisal deputy, who are attending and will be watching the Q&A and answering some questions that are maybe a little more specific than we can handle in this larger event. So also just wanted to note that if you have questions, please type them in the Q&A function of the Zoom window, and Jen will be reading those to Brian and I, and we'll answer your questions. And we will do that after I'm done with my presentation. So just a note about the presentation. What I'm going to do is do a brief overview of the assessment process, then cover sort of a high-level overview of the definitions of agricultural property, agricultural classification in Colorado, and then get into the appeal process. What can you do about values that you may have concerns about? And then we'll open it up to questions, and Jen will read questions and we'll answer them for you. So with that, Natalie, if you could move me to the next slide. Thank you. So the assessor's responsibility, we have a constitutional responsibility to establish property values. And all the processes and procedures, definitions, and calendar that we use are established in state law and the Constitution and the state statutes. And that is all interpreted for us by the State of Colorado Division of Property Taxation. And so what do? We have a very large database with information about properties, all kinds of properties in Boulder County. And we're tasked to discover, list, classify, and value properties for taxation. So discovery is the process of using public records to find information out about properties. So we see documents from the clerk and recorder, recorded deeds, building permits that come from different jurisdictions, the county, the cities, the real property transfer declaration, which is a document that is signed and filed with deeds when you transfer your property. We have access to some services that we pay for, the multiple listing service, CoStar data, which is commercial data, Marshall and Swift cost, which are cost to replace information and data. We send out a lot of letters, we do site visits, we have access to aerial imagery and mapping systems, and we use all that to find out as much as we can about properties. We also rely on property owners to tell us, and we'll touch on this later, specifically when it comes to agricultural properties. Property owners know the most and have the best information about their properties, and so we reach out to our property owners to help us understand. So we take everything that we learn about properties and we list it, and this is the listing in our database. So we gather it all, we put it in the database, and we use a software interface for that. We then take all this information we find out about properties and we classify the property. So as of January 1, which is the assessment date every year, we look at properties and identify how they're used, which is how we will classify them, and also the condition of the property. And so we're looking at the legal use of a property, not the zoned use. So zoning is established by permitting and planning departments, and that is not what we work with. We work with actual use on the ground. And then the last thing we do is establish value. And then just a note that we are audited every year. The state hires an independent auditor, and that auditor reviews us on both procedural and statistical compliance. And so we're very motivated to be compliant. The impact of the assessor not being compliant is not a good thing. It costs the county money. And so we try very hard to stay within the procedural and the statistical guidelines that are provided to us. Next slide. So we look at all properties all year. We're collecting data about properties all the time because changes are happening all the time. But we look specifically at certain sets of data, certain types of data more regularly. And this is done through the sales confirmation process. And so why are we looking at sales? Well, because sales are what we use to define property value for most property types. And so every sale that comes through that we see from the clerk and recorder, we look at those sales to understand whether or not they have a willing and knowledgeable seller and buyer, that they were on the open market, and then nothing else was transferred with that sale, such as someone might also purchase a car or a boat or something like that. We don't want to include those extra costs or values in the actual sale price of a property. So we're in there every day, we're working on sales, confirming them, and getting them ready to be used in our analysis. Part of the sales confirmation process is data exploration. So we're looking at information about these properties so that we can better define them. We add property adjustments, and these are things like, are you on a busy street? And different things like that. That would just help us understand a property better. And all of that collectively helps us set values. Now, for most property types, we use mass appraisal to establish values. And what is mass appraisal? Well, mass appraisal says that we have to establish property value for all properties in the county on the same date. And so this is different than fee appraisal, where you're dealing with one property and one value on a specific date. So we establish property values for all properties on the same date, which is May 1. And then we analyze these properties, the property information and the values, and it's an iterative process that literally takes 8 to 10 months for us to go through. It isn't just a machine or an algorithm where we plug in information and out the other end comes a value. It is a process where we are testing values, looking at values, having our appraisers look at them and see if they make sense in the market. And eventually we end up with the values that we notice property owners with. Next slide. So this is our calendar, and this is established in the statutes. So we have an overlapping 2-year calendar, and it's a 2-year cycle. So in this year, in an odd numbered year, 2023 being an odd numbered year, we're required to establish values for all properties in the entire county. And this is that analysis, the mass appraisal process, the data collection, the understanding of properties, the application of formulas that arrive at value. We do that all in 2023, in the odd numbered year for every property in the county. In the even numbered year, we only look at properties that have had a change. So we look on January 1, we say, has the classification or the use of the property changed? Has there been a remodel? Has there been a change in use? Has there been a demolition? Has there been an appeal from the prior year? So we equalize values between the years if there's been an appeal. So that's the 2-year cycle. For the reappraisal, which we just are going through right now, we use data collected from a 2-year period. And the law says you can use a minimum of 18 months. And we choose to use 2 years because that allows us to take the 6 months that are left over and allows us to take the seasonality out of our data, because we all know that sales have a seasonal fluctuation. And if we're using the full 24 months, we can remove some of that seasonality out of it. So for this year, we were looking at that value, sorry. So the yellow part of the bar graph or the calendar on the bottom is our data collection period. It started July 1st, 2020. It ended June 30th, 2022. And that's the data that we're qualifying. That's the data we use in our mass appraisal, and that helps us establish values. On January 1 of every year, we look at condition and use or classification. And so in this one, we're only seeing January of 2023. This is when we did look at properties to see if there were changes that had occurred. So the reappraisal year will run until January 2024. At that point, we will look at properties again and see if condition and use have changed. And then we go into the intervening year. And then we're back to 2025 being a reappraisal year. And so we cycle through these 2 years over and over again. On May 1, the little image here is when we send out notices of valuation. They have our new values on them. So this year, you will have received a postcard or a full notice of valuation if we mailed those to you. And on it, it has the value of your property. We enter in on May 1 into our appeal period. And so May 1 through the end of day June 8th are when we welcome appeals from property owners. So we have a lot of information we can share with property owners, and we on our website, and we ask property owners to explain to us why they feel there's a difference between the value we put on their notice and what they know about their properties. And we'll talk more about the appeal period, but it's really a time when you can go from the mass appraisal, which is best information available, and we can get down to the property owner and what they know about their property. So it's an important process. Next slide. So now I want to talk a little bit about agricultural property. And agricultural property has been highly discussed and informed and put into our legal system. So most of the information we work with when we establish agricultural valuation and classification is established for us in the state laws. So a lot of what I'll be talking about in the next handful of slides are really definitions that are established for us in state law. So the first one is in the Constitution. It says that agricultural land are defined in law, and they shall be determined solely by the consideration of the earning and productive capacity of the lands, and that it's capitalized by a rate that's prescribed by law. So there's a 13% cap rate that we use, and that's in the Constitution. So it says that we need to look at solely at the earning or productive capacity of the land. And then we determine actual value of agricultural lands by exclusive of the buildings, and we can talk about buildings in a while. It's determined by looking again at the earning capacity and the productivity during a reasonable period of time, and capitalized by 13%, so that 13% cap rate. And so the reasons behind the state having laws around agricultural classification is that we're trying to preserve and protect farm and ranch properties, really for human welfare. These are important functions for our state. These are very important contributions to our population within our state and beyond. And so the laws are really there to protect this sort of classification. And it also is to conserve land. And there are some ways you can enter into some conservation processes and get the agricultural rate. So, next slide. So here's some just high level things that we consider when we are looking at agricultural classification. So zoning that is established by jurisdictions, by planning and permitting agencies, are not taken into account when we classify agricultural property. So agricultural property can be within a city or outside of a city, can be in a subdivision. So zoning doesn't matter. That's established for different purposes by the jurisdictions. We look for current use. So when we talk about agricultural property, many of you have heard we look for 2 years plus current. So we're looking for information that this property has been used continuously for agricultural purposes. And that is presently being used as a farm or a ranch. Your land, you also have to have land that's eligible for agricultural purposes, and so it's a 10 years, previous 10 years is what we look at. And then we look for continuity of use. So we look for it to be used agriculturally every year, And 1 year of not using it agriculturally can be the basis of us removing that agricultural classification. Next slide. So I have a series of slides that just define these. So I'm going to define, and these are all defined in the statutes, what a farm is, what a ranch is, what is forced ag, what is restoration through conservation practices, conservation easements, there's decreed water rights, and then what are the non-integral improvements on property, and what does that mean? So next slide. So I want to start with the improvements. So the home, the residence on an agricultural property is classified as residential, and we are required under state law to value them on the market method. So we would be comparing them to comparable sales collected in that 2-year period to establish value for the residents on that agricultural property. Now, there are some residences on agricultural properties that are considered non-integral, or in other words, they don't contribute to the agricultural operation. So the owner occupant is not involved in the operation. They've leased the land off to somebody who is doing the farming. To be considered involved in the agricultural operation, you have to supervise, conduct, or administer some material aspect of the agricultural operation. And when we have a non-integral property or home, up to 2 acres underneath that home is considered residential. So that acreage plus the home get modeled as if and valued as if they were residential using the market method. Here's a definition of a farm, again set out in statute. It produces agricultural products that are grown in the soil, and the primary purpose is to obtain monetary profit, and you have to meet all of these provisions to be identified as a farm. And we're looking for full cycle. So we want to know that there's planting, growing, harvesting, and selling going on with what's being grown on this property. So the next is a definition of a ranch. And a ranch is a parcel of land that's used to graze livestock. And this livestock is used to obtain a monetary profit. And again, you have to meet both of these provisions. And we test this by looking for domesticated animals that actually graze. And there are animals that don't graze, but we all know the ones that are typical, cattle and the sort. And they have to be grazing to produce a profit. So are you selling the animal then to raise a profit, to create a profit? So next is forest land. So you can have forest agriculture on your property, and this is a residential property that has trees that enters into a forest management plan with the Colorado State Forest Service. It needs to be at least 40 acres. There has to be tangible wood products, so you have to have trees that you're going to harvest for profit, and it can't be used as a ranch or a farm at that time. So that's forest land. And then there's restoration through conservation practices. So this is when you have a conservation program with a conservation reserve program, which is part of the Natural Resource Conservation Service, or you have a plan with an approved conservation district. And this plan would be based on the fact that you're letting the land go fallow, you're restricting grazing, you're tilling the soil, but just to rejuvenate it, you're planting native grasses, you're putting in windbreaks, and that you've got some government programs supporting this conservation practice. And so that can allow you to be considered agricultural. And the next one is around conservation easements. And so this again is something that is at least 80 acres. And if it's less than that, there can be no residence on it. And it has to be agricultural at the time that the easement is written. It has to be qualified with an organization that does perpetual conservation easements. I know Boulder County enters into some of these. And this document has in it current and future use described. It is not being used as agricultural, but it's protected as agricultural. And it's different than the conservation practices that we just touched on. So this going through conservation or getting a conservation easement can also retain the agricultural status on your property. Decreed water rights. So if you have water rights, and these are not just any water rights, these have to be decreed or appropriated groundwater where you have a permit for it. And again, it doesn't matter where it's located. It's not based on zoning. The land has to be used as a farm or ranch, not as it's no residential use on here. And it has to be used in the production of agricultural products or livestock products. And when you have decreed water, you don't have to go through the 2 years plus current to get the agricultural status. So next slide. There are some exemptions. So not all agricultural things are taxable. So your livestock are not taxable. Your agricultural products, any sort of livestock products are not taxable. We don't go out and count cows and count tractors, so agricultural equipment is not taxable. And we don't tax ditches, canals, and flumes. So these are the exceptions to things that we would be valuing for taxation. Then there are other agricultural properties, and these are properties and uses that are agricultural in nature but do not meet the state law requirements for agricultural products. So some examples are apiaries. If an apiary, or this is beehives, are your only agricultural product, you would not get agricultural for that. You would need to have some other agricultural activity along with your apiary. Mushroom farms, fur-bearing animal farms, aquaculture, greenhouses. The issue with greenhouses is you're not growing the plant in the soil. You're growing it in a pot or in a table, something that's not an actual production of the animal or the plant in your soil. And then commercial sheds are not, fruit and potato sheds. And these properties, the one I didn't put on here is also pleasure horse boarding is not considered an agricultural use in the law. And all of these types of uses are valued as commercial, and we look at the 3 approaches to value. So we look at cost, income, and market. The next slide. So what do we do to find out about agricultural use on property? So the first is physical review. We may reach out and ask if we can come on your property. You do not have to allow us on your property. State law says we cannot enter a property without permission. So we might ask. It's certainly useful if we can enter a property, but we understand not everybody wants us on the property. So what we're looking for is evidence of agricultural production. So is there actual grazing going or evidence of it having happened? Are you getting ready to plant, or is there a crop in the ground? We're looking for size, accessibility, topography, for buildings and equipment that would lead us to understand that there's production happening here. We have access to the state soil survey and to aerial photos where we can look at what's going on. We're looking for irrigation ditches, water fence, and for any sort of soil conservation practices that are ongoing on the property. And then we turn to you. Every year or so, we send out agricultural questionnaires, and it's really important for us to hear from you so we understand how you're using your property. And so the questionnaire is lengthy, we know that, but anything you can share with us helps us properly classify your property. So here's just some things that we would appreciate seeing if you have them, your IRS Form 1040-F or something equivalent to that, any leases you have, receipts, brand inspections, government programs you're participating in, memberships in organizations, what your water shares are, if you have deeded or decreed water rights, and then your sale of your products. Those are really important. They help us understand the production that's going on your property. So valuation, and I didn't, and if you want to get into the formula, the nitty-gritty of this formula, please contact our office. We'd be happy to go through that. But we use, it's income based upon the productivity of the property. We get rates, income, and expenses from the Division of Property Taxation. We also go out and look at local data, looking for yields, rotations, expenses, and this all gets rolled together in some rates that we use. So the formula is applied slightly differently depending on grazing and farming. When we go through the formula, we arrive at actual value. We then multiply it times the assessment rate. So agricultural property, the assessment rate is 26.4%. So the actual value times 26.4 gets you your assessed value, and assessed value is what taxes are calculated off of. All right, so now I just want to spend a little time talking about the appeal process. So as I mentioned, every year between May 1 and June 8th, We welcome appeals from property owners to help us understand their properties better and get the values correct. And this slide kind of walks you through all the different dates in the appeal process. So May 1, we sent out notices of valuation. From May 1 through June 8th, we accept appeals. And just a reminder that if we need everything in by end of day June 8th, we're not allowed under the law to accept late appeals. So please make sure you get in your appeal in a timely manner. We send out notices of determination, which is the results of our review, on August 15th. On the back side of that notice is the explanation and the instructions on how to file at the County Board of Equalization if you still have concerns about your value. And the County Board of Equalization, actually, you can apply or you can file an appeal with them up till September 15th. Their appeals generally start sooner, but you have until the 15th to get an appeal in with them. These are actual hearings where you show up with your information, a staff member from my office shows up with information, and a hearing officer hears both sides, and the hearing officer makes the decision. Soon after November 1st, these hearings run till November 1st. Soon after that, the county board will send out their notification, their determinations to the property owners. And along with that is the instruction on what you do next. So if you're still concerned about your property value, you have the opportunity to take your appeal into the next year. And there are 3 levels of appeal you can take on. You can file for after the county board. And these are the Board of Assessment Appeals. And again, this is a hearing level appeal. It's at the state of Colorado. Again, you or your representative and a member from my office meet before a board, and they make the decision. The hearing officers make the decision and will send out a determination. You can file at district court. Generally, that involves an attorney, or you can choose to go with binding arbitration. And binding arbitration is a level of appeal where once you arrive at a decision, your appeal rights are terminated. You decided this is my last time I want to talk about this. Whatever the hearing officer decides is final. And again, it is before a hearing officer. It's managed by the County Board of Equalization. Next slide. So reasons to appeal. The first off the bat that we're hearing a lot of is, I got this notice and this value just doesn't seem to be right. And so particularly with agricultural properties based on this formula. So if you feel we just don't have your information or we've missed something about your property, we'd like to hear from you. We also need to know if our property record is not accurate, and you can call in our office and ask us to review your record with you. Also, your property record information is, a lot of it, maybe not all of it, available on our property search tool, which is on the county website. If you feel you have an incorrect classification, we want to hear from you so we can work with you on that, or if there's condition issues. Just a reminder that we cannot accept appeals for taxes. Taxes are not in the scope of the assessor's office. We work with value. So we would like to talk to you about your value, not your taxes. So minimum requirements. A minimum requirement is you can sign that postcard or download an appeal form or go out on our online appeal and say, I appeal, and sign it, and you're done. As long as you get that in before the end of day June 8th, you have an on-time appeal. We really hope you will give us more information than that. That doesn't tell us enough about why you're concerned. And so the more you can share with us, the better job we can do. So highly encourage you to do more than the minimum so that we can work with you. And then just a reminder, we can't go beyond June 8th with an appeal. So what could you provide? Income data from your ag production. If we sent out the questionnaire and you didn't get it filled out in time and you are now concerned about your value, get us that questionnaire with your appeal so that we know what's going on with your property. If you have a home that's non-integral, now you're moving into residences and how residential property are valued. And so you could look at the market, you could look at comparables. And we have a tool that I'll talk about here in a minute that allows you to do that on your own. For the agricultural, we're looking for income, cost, sales within that two-year period. But if you can't find anything, we can go back to 5 years, but mostly within that 2-year time data collection period. If you have any sort of damage and you want us to look at that, any sort of cost to cure documents that you would have that are not about typical wear and tear, but just, you've got bentonite on your soil, or you've got, something that would be an issue really impacting your home. We love to see photographs of things, or if you have a fee appraisal that was done for purchase or refinance, that might help us understand the value of your home as well. So what sort of tools do we have? Our website, and I apologize for it, we try to put everything we can out there, and it can be overwhelming. If you get out on the website and you feel like you just can't get your arms around what we have there, please call us or email us and ask us to spend a little time with you. Certainly can come into our office as well and sit at a computer and we'll help you. The most very important tool is the property search tool. And this is a mapping tool where you can type in your name or your address or your account number. And on the left sidebar, there's accordion. You can open up sections and look at the information about your property. The tool I alluded to before, that where you could look up your home and the land under your home, is called the Residential Comparable Sales Lookup Tool. And there's a link for that out on my website. And it allows you to find comparables. So you can find homes that are similar to yours and build a grid where you can compare these properties next to each other, download a report and submit that with your appeal. And then we have lots of forms and handouts and more. I won't go into all of it, but our website is www.boulderassessor.org. So please take advantage of all the documentation we have out there. So how do you file your appeal? So the only way you can't file an appeal is by calling us. And that's because we need a record of some kind that you are filing your appeal. So the one that's being used heavily, it's very easy to use, is our online e-appeal tool. And it's on our website, very interactive, very easy to use. You can also email us at assessor@bouldercounty.org, and you can attach photos and documents. Write us an email saying, here's my concerns, I want to appeal, and email that off to us. We accept, obviously, mail. It has to be postmarked by June 8th, but mail in the postcard. You can download or pick up the full form from us and mail that in to us. We have drop off. You can, I've got it ready. I'm downtown. I'll just drop it in the office. Welcome you to drop it here. We have some drop boxes, one here just across from the Boulder Theater in downtown Boulder on 14th. There's also a drop box in Longmont at the county building on Kaufman. It's on the parking lot side of the building. Or you can fax. We still have a fax number, and we have people who have been faxing this appeal. So we're happy to welcome them that way as well. So I wanted to touch, this is this triangle I borrowed from somebody else. It was not my brainchild, but it really helps people understand the process, the revenue, the tax bill process. So the very top of this pyramid is what the assessor's office does. And this is, we establish value. So we go out and we report what happened in the market during that 24-month period where we looked at sales and analyzed them. So we establish value, and that's what we're happy to work with you on if you're appealing. The second level is the assessment rate, and that is established by the state legislature. And ever since Gallagher was laid down, we all voted on that in 2020, the state has been changing the assessment rate yearly to make it more reasonable for properties. So we've seen the residential rate go down. We've also seen the agricultural rate go down from 29% to 26.4%. So the legislature is concerned about the impact of property values on homeowners, on property owners, and so they're working to minimize the impact. So you multiply the actual value times the assessment rate, you get the assessed value. And the assessed value is what is used to generate taxes from. So for residential properties, currently the assessed value is the actual value times 7.765. So less than 8% of your property value is what you're actually paying taxes on. The next step then is the mill levy, and mill levies are established by taxing jurisdictions, the county, your cities, the school district, fire districts, water districts, metro districts, any kind of library districts. They go through a public process in the fall. So in August, we share with them the value of the properties within their boundaries, and they start a budget process. And that is a public process that citizens can participate in, where they decide on their budget and propose a mill levy. And the mill levy is what's multiplied against the assessed value to arrive at your taxes. So that's what comes out on your tax bill. So this just I like this diagram because it helps us understand that actual value, though it went up a lot this year, the impact of taxes is not as much. So you will see an increase in your taxes, that goes without saying, but it will not be as much as the increase in your actual value. Excuse me. And I think that's it. So I put on this slide the URL for the Division of Property Taxation. They have a lot of information out there about all kinds of properties and how they're valued. And so if you really want to get into the weeds and learn a lot about this, that's a great place to go. The other great place to go is to call our office. So email us at assessor@bouldercounty.org or call us at 303-441-3530, and we'll be happy to work with you. And with that, I'd like to hand this over to Jen, and if there's any questions, we would be more than happy to answer them. And I'll ask Brian to help me with this if possible.
Thanks, Cindy. I hope you have some water there. I meant to ask you earlier. We have a couple of questions that came in. We had some that were answered offline. I might circle back on one of them that might apply to everyone. But one of the first questions came in from Erin, and she asks, has it always been 26%? I can only see it broken out between agricultural and residential since last year. Also, I'm wondering how agricultural formula went up so much from 2022 to 2023 if the percentage has remained 26%.
So I can answer the 26.4% question. That was set by the legislature, I think in 2022. And that, so I have no control over that. That's really the legislators decide and they propose those and we work with them. So that's where those come from. I believe we'll see those change into the future. There's actually a ballot initiative this year, at least one that I know of, Proposition HH, which actually talks about reducing over 10 years these assessment rates. So something to inform ourselves about through the summer so that we're educated when that shows up on our ballot. And then I think the other part of the question was that something, and the mill levy is applied the same. Once we get the assessment, the assessed value, the mill levy is against that whole assessed value. The assessment rate is what calculates the assessed value. So if you have residential and agricultural, there's assessed values for each of those that are summed to be the assessed value for the property. And that's what the mill levy is multiplied against. Did I answer that fully, Jen?
I think so. Erin, let me know. It was about the agricultural formula going up so much from 2022 to 2023.
That's a question I think Brian might be able to speak to. It's all based
sure. And as Cindy alluded to in her presentation there, the agricultural valuation is based on commodity prices, size of what your production is, and all these sort of other elements that are set by DPT and other organizations that we look at, other data sources, and also we look at local data when we can. Expenses are removed from that. We get to a net operating income and it's divided by a cap rate. So, it's all based off of how those prices shifted in the market. And, just like other things, there were definitely, inflation and market changes to commodity prices over the data collection period.
Okay, hopefully that answered it. Erin, let me know if you have any follow-up maybe. Okay, our next question came in from an anonymous attendee. They say that greenhouses are not necessarily grown above ground. Our houses have crops in ground and yet are still categorized as commercial. Every assessment we contest this classification and nothing changes. Again, many greenhouses are used for farming to extend our incredibly short growing season. An established greenhouse does not equate to commercial above ground production. Can you speak to that, or is that for the state, Cindy?
I can speak to it because I used to work at the state. So for 25 years, I worked for the state of Colorado, Division of Property Taxation. And we applied and actually wrote the manual, ARL, Assessor Reference Library 2, that dictates how Constitution, statutes, court case law are interpreted into policies and procedures. So in a nutshell, basically what court cases have come down. They've been published within the judicial system of the state of Colorado, which specifically denote that greenhouses are not ag. So we are bound by the law, and the law is constitutional, but also supported by the interpretation within the court system. And so that is case law, and that's where we're at this point. So until something changes in that way, we're bound by it.
Thanks, Ken. Let's see. I have one that was answered by Ken, but maybe it is of relevance to other folks. Megan asked, by putting in an appeal, is there any risk that the property valuation would increase through the process?
And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
No, I just responded that anytime we receive any information in an appeal, we're going to go ahead and consider it to make sure we derive the best value. However, it's not the norm. It's a case-by-case situation. It can legally go up, but it's not the norm that it does in fact increase. And Cindy, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you got it.
Thank you.
It is extremely rare for us to increase a value.
Mm-hmm.
We know that I would say if you know you have something that would increase value, you may not want to invite us in because we can't unsee things. You can't unremember. But it is very, very rare that we actually go in and raise a value unless there's just really a great reason for it.
And a lot of people think of it as their caution is thinking it's a penalty. We don't penalize people appropriately. We try to get the correct value.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, Erin asks, in what ways are ag and residential assessments different? Is the mill levy applied to ag and residents the same?
Well, I said the value is, I think you muted, Cindy.
Yeah, sorry. The assessments are different just in that it's a different percentage, and that's set by the legislature. So agricultural is 26.4% of this actual value that's derived by a formula. So it's a very preferable rate. And agricultural properties have very low values. So even though it's 26.4, it's 26.4 for very small value. Residential assessment rates are established as well by the legislature. They've done nothing but go down over the years. They're currently at 7.765, and I think if this Proposition HH passes, it'll go down again. Mm-hmm. So I hope that answers.
I'd like to add the fact that the approaches are statutorily dictated that can be used to value. Residential versus ag. Ag is you're stuck with income approach is the only approach you can use at a 13% cap rate. Residential, you actually use actual sales of properties within a data collection period, market transactions to dictate the valuation. So ag is based on income approach based on law, and residential is based on market approach based on law.
And where that would differ is if you have a residence on the property. And so it picks up the residential process.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. A question came in from Schneider. How do you determine exceptional plus versus exceptional versus very good versus very good, very, very good versus good? I guess that these are breakdowns. I haven't memorized these.
These are our qualities.
Thank you.
Qualities, and Brian, do you feel you can field that one?
Sure. So we use a few different things, right? And Marshall Valuation Services is one thing that we rely on to give us some of that information in terms of different factors. And some of those factors that go into some of those things to think about are fixtures are one thing that a lot of these cost manuals focus on, and fixtures being toilet sinks, showers, all that sorts of things. So if you have 5-piece bathroom or something like that, that typically costs more than the 3-piece bathroom, and it typically pushes you up into a different higher quality level. Things like brick versus frame construction. Things like 2x4 construction versus 2x6 construction versus 2x8 construction. Differences in roofing, clay tiles versus asphalt shingles versus wood shakes. Things like differences in heating systems, forced air versus radiant versus hot water baseboard. Do you have ACs? Things of all these sort of factors kind of all shake down into various categories and gives us to our different condition levels.
And just to add to it, if you would like a copy of our quality manual, we do have one. Just contact our office and ask for it, and we can get that to you. So we do have a document that explains it.
Okay, thank you. Megan had some follow-up. It may still be worth an appeal if there are good reasons, it sounds like. And she also asked, what would cause a property's residential assessment increase, but the agricultural assessment piece decrease?
Well, the residential property is compared to the market. So if sales, as we saw, the data collection period that we're using was when there was some really incredibly high sales that happened. And we have to use that data. And using that data is what established residential properties increasing so much. So agricultural is based on production and the producing capacity of the land. And so it's a different formula. It's based on income. And so they're sort of function in a different way. So as Ken said, it depends on the methodology that we're required to use on each of these and the data that we use on each of these different property classifications. And that's what makes the difference, why one might go up while the other goes down.
Yeah, and residential is, once again, we're looking at sales local, and with agriculture, we get rates and information from the state. We are put in, so as a statewide versus one county, looking at 64 counties of information the state provides for comparable types of property, ag properties. So some of it's out of our control. And even we don't know what's going on with the market. We know the state has dictated for uniformity and equalization those rates for ag.
Okay, thank you. I think that covered it. Erin wrote back, it sounds like residential value is based on comps in the area, but agricultural value is based on what again? I think you may have just answered that, Ken. You mentioned a lot of market value changes, etc. Is that something that is not tangible for us to see or identify or appeal? I'm able to see the comps that are used to assess the value for my residents, so that does feel tangible for me.
So are you
asking?
asking?
So I can take this one.
Oh, go ahead, Brian, do it. Go.
Yeah, I think what we're getting at here is the agricultural piece and kind of how we can go about appealing that. And so that's where when we send out those questionnaires and ask for your specific production, how much you're making, all these sorts of things, because if we don't have that, we're just applying market to your property. We're saying, okay, you have X number of acres, you can support this, and this is what your agricultural production is based on. So we need your information to really be able to dive down and see what's going on with your individual property. And that's how we get there.
Thank you. Lisa thanks everyone for their time tonight and has found this informative and helping her understand her ag property. Her question is, are properties in floodway hazard zones valued as less?
So that information can impact the valuation. It's an attribute that we try and track. If that's something that you find that we don't have on your account, please let us know, email us, give us a call, whatever it may be. But yes, that can be a factor. And I don't want to say that everything is everything, because the appraisal analysis sometimes things matter and sometimes things don't matter. But it could very much be something that would matter.
Thank you. An anonymous attendee is asking, if residential is based on actual sales and agriculture is based on production, what is commercial valuation based upon?
So for commercial properties, we're required to look at cost, income, and market. And that's Brian and Kathy's world. They do commercial valuation as well. So we have to look at all three of those and make a decision on which is the most salient to describe the value of that property. I don't know, Brian, if you want to add more to that.
That is the basics. On the commercial side, we have the ability to look at the three typical approaches to value that most of you have probably heard of, and that's cost, sales, and income. Sales is where we go out and look at sales of like properties. Hopefully, if we're looking at an office, we're looking at sales of office. We also do a cost on the property, so we figure out the land value, we build it up from scratch, and then we take off the depreciation. And figure out a value that way. And then the other way is through income. And so that's when we reach out to commercial property owners and we figure out what their potential gross income is, and we figure out things like vacancy and expenses, and we get down to a net operating income similar to the agricultural analysis that they were explaining earlier, and then we apply a cap rate and get to a value. Once we get to that, we decide which of those approaches gives us the best, strongest information. Usually it's based off the availability of data and what the market does, and so that we reconcile to the most appropriate method there.
Okay, thank you. John asks, can you explain why apiaries are not considered agriculture? Without bees, crop production would be much reduced.
Again, this is statutory and then in the courts. So this has been decided in the courts. And so we're held to what the laws say, and you may know more about the actual laws, but basically they told us that if it's the only thing that you're claiming is agricultural, that it isn't agricultural. But if it's, say you have another crop that you're growing and bees, you also have bees, then the bees are fine.
Yeah.
So
It's not been interpreted by the courts as productive from the ground, from the land itself, and therefore it's not been qualified as ag. And so this court case law that supports the apiaries are not ag.
Okay, there was a follow-up question from Chris about the apiaries as well, and he said he's a full-time beekeeper, relies on the pollen and nectar from his plants on his property. He has a direct nexus based on the plants he sows into the ground that grow the bees. In this case, how would he not be considered an agricultural endeavor? Is that something that would have to be pursued above
I would
the
say
county?
that, take it through the appeal process. Based on our interpretation and the manuals we're bound by, we'd have to deny it, and therefore it'd have to go to the county board. We'd recommend that it be denied at the county board, then it'd have to go to the trier fact level, because the court case law actually came from the whole process through the system, and we have to abide by the law. And the law has been set by court case, and our interpretation is it's similar to the case where it did not in fact qualify, and it's specifically spelled out that that type of property doesn't qualify. So we have to abide by that unless something changes within the law itself. So,
but just to note, if this is something that's really important to you and you want to take it into the trier of fact process, go through the hearings, that's how decisions and how laws are changed. But it will take time to do that. But you certainly can avail yourself of the appeal process, and taking, even beyond BAA, you can go Court of Appeals and on, and to have this classification changed.
and another thing I've seen people do, go to your legislator. They can look into making adjustments, and they can check that up to if you there were representatives of you. So if you believe it should be different, that's another way to try to broach the law side, the legal side.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is, what was the average increase in property valuation in the new assessments? Ours was increased 91.7%.
So the median increase in the county was 35%, but that's looking at the whole county. That's a lot of properties. Different areas had different percent increases. I live in Louisville, it was 42%. Unincorporated Plains, this is a median, so you're talking the top of the bell curve, was about 45%. So obviously with the bell curve, you're going to have some that were much higher and some that were much lower. I would encourage you, if you feel your home was not valued correctly, to reach out to us, appeal, see if you can use our online tool to look at comparables and see if where your property lines up with other sold properties. But avail yourself of the appeal process if you're concerned.
Thanks, Cindy. Let's see. Aaron followed up with When do you send that? I don't remember receiving a questionnaire. There's a questionnaire that goes out to ag producers.
So that questionnaire does go out. We don't send it out to everybody every time. So you may not have gotten one this time around. We try to hit as many people as we can, but it's there's a lot of you out there. If you would like one and you have some info for us, please let us know.
Okay, thank you. Also, is it based on my ag sales? Meaning, if my sales are high on my farm, you will assess my ag value higher. Is that correct?
So again, we're going to go back to what Ken and Cindy said earlier. Our interest here is not getting that information and trying to raise your value. Our intent on that information is trying to establish that you are doing an agricultural endeavor for a monetary profit per the statute. And that's what that helps us determine, helps you keep your agricultural status, helps us know what's going on in the county also, because we also track things like, how much hay is being produced, how much you're getting for the hay, what are commodity prices, what are expenses. So this data, kind of helps everybody then kind of get into a better market level in terms of those valuations.
Okay, thank you for that. Chris followed up asking, could you please reference the apiary the specific court case regarding apiaries? Ken, is that something we could get possibly offline?
Yeah, it's in the Assessor's Reference Library, Volume 2. Does a classification. It's on the Division of Property Taxation's website. So I can look to the page because those manuals are pretty thick. So I can look for the apiary,
Okay.
the actual case that has provided. There's a follow-up, I think, by Chris Bohr, and I was typing in there. Might be easier to answer. And he said, I met with Bill Thompson to discuss the classification of apiaries and ARL. He mentioned that the ARL is guidance to be interpreted on a case-by-case basis, ostensibly at the county level. I am a full-time beekeeper and rely on pollen and nectar from the plants on the property. I think he went into that. I guess the part that I would say is there's actually case law. It says the manuals are binding upon assessors and staff. The interpretation itself, if it specifically says court case law tells us this, then we have to go ahead and follow that. But there is a case-by-case analysis. So anytime you feel like you have a case, like you have this specific information, you can bring it to our office and we'll be able to look at what you're saying and see if it's atypical or it fits differently in that potential classification. And so nothing's absolute, but the limited information provided, it does not appear that that would actually qualify as agriculture from what he said. And I work with Bill at the division, and he's the current ag person. And I think that could be misconstrued as to how that's done, but case by case is how it's done. But if there's specific case law that speaks to something like apiaries, it's not as up in the air. It's not as it might seem. So I invite him to go ahead and give me a call or contact me. I'll be happy to go ahead and discuss it further.
Thanks, Ken. I don't know if you saw John's follow-up question. Can the legislature change the tax law, RE?
Yes, they can. They establish the laws. They can override what may have been in a court. So yes, reach out to your legislators and talk to them. And as Ken said, they can write a bill and they can get it passed. They can change the guidelines that we're required to use.
Okay. An anonymous attendee said, I would have loved our valuation to have increased 91%. Ours increased 600%.
Wow.
I encourage that property owner to appeal.
I would too. I would too.
Thank you. And John followed up and also said the value of his crops at his Niwot farm has not doubled. However, the valuation has ?
Sure. Again, that's a very specific question on that property. And I very much encourage property owner to appeal and let us take a look and see what's going on there.
Okay. John finds it interesting that almost everyone commenting is a member of the Boulder County Farmers Markets. Well, John, I know that the Boulder County Farmers Markets farmers did some outreach via their director to ask for this conversation with Cindy Braddock, and we tried to open it up to everybody else. So I think in the interest of being transparent and open, we wanted to make sure that everyone else had a chance to attend. But we do appreciate Mackenzie reaching out and trying to make sure that our farmers could have this conversation tonight. But thank you for mentioning that. I don't have any additional questions at the moment. I don't know if there's other questions. I don't know if there's other questions maybe that are related maybe to ag producers, Cindy, that you've seen that anyone hasn't asked that may be helpful to the people listening.
You know, I kind of defer to Brian.
Okay.
I think we've touched on a lot of them. You know, the concern about why values have moved and income didn't move. Why did my value move? Brian, have you run across any others that we haven't touched on tonight?
Not specifically, but you know, I do encourage you guys, if you're seeing problems with your valuations, please reach out, you know, directly to myself or Kathy Brennan, and you know, we're happy to chat with you guys. I also, you know, encourage you to use the process. You know, the appeal process is here for a reason. It's for, you know, it's here to protect property owners. It's here to protect valuation on all sides. And so, you know, if there's something going on there that doesn't look correct, please let us know. And I mean, we're happy to chat with you about it and take a look.
And you can email our office or call and specifically ask to be put in touch with Brian or Kathy. So Brian Floyd, Kathy Brennan. Ken Beezer is our appraisal deputy. As he said, he's got 25 years worth of looking at the guidance and building the guidance that assessors work with. So he's a great asset if you want to talk about, you know, case law or those sort of things. But Kathy and Brian are sort of the boots on the ground when it comes to ag valuation. And I know they'd be happy to talk to you. So don't hesitate to email us, call us. Dropping in. Brian and Kathy are not in the office every day, so it'd probably be better to reach out via email or a phone call so that we can arrange a time to have a conversation.
And
You're muted.
Thank you, Cindy. My value increased 62.2%, which is higher than the 45% you said is at the top value of the bell curve.
So there's something going on with your property where when we compared or looked at your value and looked at all the characteristics associated with, and this is, I'm assuming you have a residence as well as agricultural, so they function separately, they're different formulas. But if you look at your residence, try to find sales of properties like yours, look for similarity, and see what they sold for during that 24-month period, which is what we are required to work with. And that might lead you to understand why it went up 62%. If you just can't find anything or you don't understand this, please call us. Please call us and let us know. You can file an appeal and we can work with you on it. Let us know that you would like some support so you can understand this better.
Okay, I don't see we're open if there's any other questions that anyone has not had a chance to ask. Definitely want to welcome an opportunity here. You're welcome to ask anything that you'd like. Otherwise, here is some contact information, as Cindy has explained a couple of times. We encourage everybody to call, email, come see the assessor's office, and they'll try to do everything they can to assist and get your questions answered. But we really do appreciate, again, Mackenzie and Boulder County Farmers Market folks and everyone else who came tonight to listen in. Cindy, I don't know if you want to close us out. I think don't have anything else other than some thank yous.
Just thank you so much for all of you participating. Please take advantage of this appeal period. Let us help us understand. And just another thank you to Jennifer and to Natalie and to the county commissioners for making this available, to Mackenzie for asking for this. And we're happy to engage with the community, so never hesitate to ask and reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you so much for your time tonight. Appreciate it.